This is Nadine from Egypt. She now lives in Cardiff, and hopefully I'm going to meet her in London in a few weeks. She's coming up with her mum to see this exhibition. And Nadine was absolutely brilliant. I arrived at her home and she was so upfront, so confident, and so funny. Her world was very small. Her world was in her head. She had no idea what was in the UK and what was in Egypt. She was talking about going shopping in Tesco's and Peacocks when she was back in Egypt, and she was talking about going to the beach, hot sunny beach here in the UK. Everything was mixed up. She had an amazing imagination. She had all these imaginary friends and pets and little brothers and sisters. When it came to the end of the interview, I asked her if there was anything she'd like to ask me. I asked all the kids this, and usually they asked me how many kids I was still needing to find, which country I was from, what I had wanted to be when I grew up. They turned around a few of the questions that I had asked them in their interview, but Nadine said to me in her lovely Welsh accent, which I won't try to imitate, "Yes, actually, I'd like to ask you this. We've got some ice cream. Would you like some ice cream?" So this is Juan, age 3, from Chile, now living in the Orkney Isles. And he came to the UK because his dad got a job as the manager of a salmon farm. I wanted to show in this project how far the recent wave of immigration has reached. So I went to meet Juan. Neither he nor his mother really spoke any English. So I was reliant on a friend of mine who speaks fluent Spanish, which I don't, to make the plans for me. And then once I got there, I got her on the phone. She interpreted for us. We went out to do the picture on a boat. I wanted to make sure it was visible in the picture that we weren't in Surbiton. I'd made a long journey and I wanted to make sure you could see that we were somewhere quite far away. So I brought the Chilean mother and son to the harbour and we went out on this boat. So this is Emmanuel from Sudan. He was 13 years old when I met him, and I found him through the organisation Refugee Action. He had arrived in the UK a couple of years earlier, having fled the south of Sudan with his family and ended up in a refugee camp in Uganda. He came to the UK as part of something called the Gateway Programme, which was part of the government's immigration programme, resettling immigrants from war-torn countries into particular towns in the UK. When his family arrived in Bolton, they were given a sort of minder family who showed them how things operated. Everything was new to Emmanuel. Traffic lights were new. He told me that he was amazed at how many cars there were. There were so many that he stopped counting, whereas in Sudan and Uganda, if he saw a car, he would count. He would count how many he saw in any given week and be excited by them. This minder family in the UK showed him and his family how to use a cooker, how taps worked, explained that when there's a red dot on the tap it means it's hot and blue means it's cold. He slept in a bed for the first time and he told me that he couldn't wake up in the morning. He couldn't get up because he was so comfortable. Whereas I guess in the camp in Uganda he would have woken with the light and the noise and the chickens running in and out of the huts. He talked about seeing people kissing for the first time. Actually, when I interviewed him, we had a chat and his father then showed me something that Emmanuel had prepared in advance to read out to me. And I had a look and I saw that we covered almost everything that he had written about, but he'd written something that he hadn't then volunteered in the interview, which was about people kissing. So I asked him about that, and he told me that when he arrived, he was amazed to see people kissing because people don't do that, as he said anyway, in Africa. And there were people kissing. He gave this whole inventory, people kissing in the street, at the bus station, in the offices, in the school playground, and it wasn't something he'd experienced before. This is Boubacar from Niger. He's 14 years old and lives in Limehouse, London. I put a lot of time into finding this kid. There are not many people from Niger living in the UK. I think in general, if they're going to migrate, they go to a French-speaking country. And I found him eventually through BBC World Service. He goes to a dance school on the weekends, and he was an amazing dancer. He was such a confident kid and also very quiet. And when I asked him what he thought people from Niger could learn from this country, he said that people from Niger would be surprised if they came to the UK, because people in Niger think that it's a woman's job to do the cooking and cleaning, but if they came to the UK they would see that a man as well can do the same thing. This is Aura from Guatemala. She now lives in Oxford. She came from a mountain village in Guatemala. She was the 7th child in her family, and her parents gave her up for adoption. She was then adopted by a family living in the UK, actually a Scandinavian family, and at the age of 2 or 3 months came to live with them here. She talked about thinking about Guatemala. She told me that she still thinks about Guatemala and wonders what her life would be like if she was living there. And I loved what she imagined. She imagined that if she was living there now, she'd probably be working in the fields and making, quote, those bracelets. So I think at the moment her knowledge of Guatemala is probably quite limited.